Hi everyone, my name is Herkeph and welcome back to the second BareBones hardcore world. The world where we have imposed a bunch of rules in hopes of crippling me rather severely. In our last episode, we transformed our mushroom island into a flowery cherry blossom forest in an attempt to make it possible to look at without the need of heavy antidepressants. But in today's episode, I thought it might be a good idea to do something that is actually useful to us and our mission of not being on the receiving end of a cataclysmic penetration of the non-consensual variety, and I ended up deciding that the little something was going to be a place to farm all of the crops I may ever need. So I wasted absolutely no time at all and got to gathering all of the materials this latest project would need. As some of you may know, the amount of surface space on the mushroom island I've decided to settle down on is almost as lacking as my sense of self-preservation. This meant that our capabilities of farming all of our crops on our island was rather limited. However, against all odds, using my severely lacking intellect, I actually managed to come up with a solution to this conundrum. That was to build a tower where each floor was going to hold a farm for a specific crop. However, since I wanted quite a few different crop farms, 6 to be exact, the tower was going to be rather tall and require a substantial amount of resources. And as you may have noticed from my other builds on the island, my block palette involves a lot of deep slate along with mangrove logs, which are both probably the most annoying materials to get. Deep slate is the stone type that takes the longest to mine, which is rather suboptimal if you're stupid enough to limit yourself to only using stone tools. And mangrove wood is the absolute worst type of wood to farm, as the trees have a composition similar to that of a child with scoliosis. The amount of both of these incredibly annoying to acquire materials was also rather obscene, as I needed close to 15 stacks of deep slate and about 13.5 stacks of mangrove logs. It is at times like these that I find bungee jumping without a cord a bit enticing, but once I had wrapped up the mental breakdown session that was the collection of deep slate, I was faced with the issue of acquiring mangrove wood. This was most definitely going to be significantly more soul-crushing than the deep slate, as you can simply walk in a straight line and continuously mine. But with mangrove, I would need to plant a bunch of trees on the surface and wait for them to grow, to then subject myself to the mental equivalent of stepping on a Lego piece in the middle of the night. That being to crawl around in a deformed tree to get all of the logs to prevent there being a bunch of flying chunks of tree that get in the way of other trees. All of this while shitting myself thinking that I'll fall to my death as the leaves I'm standing on would decay. But the incredibly annoying and inconvenient task didn't end there. As mentioned earlier, our island is small enough to have people desperately try to convince others that it's average. This meant that we didn't have enough space to farm the wood, so we had to find another place to do it. And regardless of what place I chose, I would still have to deal with mobs, so I also had to terraform an area and put up walls to protect me from all the hoodlums lurking around and waiting for me to spread my cheeks. Once I had done just that, I went on to spend enough time to pay off the average American student loan debt.
I am never going to financially recover from this.
Just chopping down a bunch of trees. This was just as fun and eventful as you may imagine. But with that, we had gotten the absolute worst part out of the way, meaning we were almost ready to get started building. Rather luckily, we did have pretty much everything else we needed apart from a bit of oak. This was a surprisingly nice change of pace, as I had spent an unreasonable amount of time chopping down all of those scoliosis trees. It was then just a matter of actually building the tower. and now that the tower was built, it was just a matter of actually planting all of our crops. However, we didn't actually have all of the crops I had planned floors for, meaning that we had to go off on an adventure involving criminal activities in the form of theft. The specific crops we needed were beetroot, melons, and pumpkins. Melons and pumpkins are pretty straightforward to find, as pumpkins generate in plains fields, and you're basically guaranteed to find melons if you find a jungle, which we had whilst getting sandstoned earlier. So I went off and defiled Mother Nature and acquired 2 out of the 3 crops we needed. Now the only one left was beetroot. However, this one was going to be the hardest one, as the only reasonable way for me to get my hands on them was to find a village in either a desert, plains field, or snowy plains. And I had unfortunately not seen any of those that actually had beetroot seeds in the near vicinity. So I decided to do what I do best, that being to aimlessly wander around confused and expect everything I want in life to present itself. As per usual, this worked, and I managed to find a desert village right next to the desert we had used to grab all of the sandstone, which was very epic. And in addition to that, the village had 2 blacksmiths, which yielded 9 pieces of iron that would come in incredibly handy as we've used up all of the iron we had to craft lanterns. So after having stolen everything of value that wasn't nailed down to the floor, as well as having invaded someone's home to kick them out of bed to hijack it, I went on my merry little way back home. Now that I had successfully acquired all the crops I needed, I got to the rather testicle-tickling activity of planting all of them, officially having my tower up and running. Since I am an incredibly responsible and productive adult with mature and well-thought-out priorities, I decided to spend over an hour running up and down my tower to farm virtual crops that I most likely won't ever use. I also converted all of the crops into bone meal in hopes of speeding up the process of fully populating all of the farming plots. But with that, the entire project was finally finished, and I was honestly rather content with it, as I felt like our admittedly rather flamboyant island needed a taller build. And rather excitingly, as the project had been wrapped up, we had officially made it to day 150, meaning that we were now allowed to kill the Ender Dragon and grab our wings, which was very exciting. Needless to say, I was rather aroused by the idea of acquiring a set of wings, as it would come to serve as a very valuable anti-penetration device, as it would make me significantly less dependent on clutching if I were to fall, as well as allow me to fly away from dangerous situations. I was also in desperate need of shulker boxes, as my inventory was completely cluttered at all times, as I had quite a few items that I always needed to keep on me. Since we had locked the dragon fight for this long, we had had everything we needed to locate the stronghold, which was very convenient. So I grabbed everything I thought we would need and started looking for the stronghold. I decided to opt out of using the bed technique to kill the dragon, as I was pissing myself at the prospect of setting off a bunch of explosions right on top of my head. I'm not entirely sure how I came to this decision, as I'm fully aware that the bed technique is completely safe and that I've practiced it enough to take out the dragon consistently. But my general strategy in life is to act first and think later, so I guess I was true to myself. And after having struggled for my life navigating around a bunch of powdered snow, I finally located the stronghold and could start looking for the portal. This part is typically not an issue in the slightest in terms of danger. However, in this world, I die if I get hit twice by any regular hostile mob, so to reduce the risk of me getting completely demolished, I had made sure to bring plenty of invisibility potions as well as a couple of golden apples. And after a surprisingly short session of running around like a moron, I found the portal and made my way through. I was then faced with the good old task of mining my way out of a box of endstone, using unenchanted stone tools. It feels like I always spawn in a box, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. My current and most likely theory is that Mojang has a personal grudge against me, and regularly sneaks into my room at night to apply some kind of virus to my computer that screws me over in game. I also believe there are pyramids in Bosnia. Anyways, as I made my way up to the surface, I realized that the dragon was flying right over where I was about to emerge, and that it was flying extremely low. So low, in fact, that I took melee damage as I tried to get out of my hole. I had absolutely no idea that the dragon dealt as much damage per hit as a skeleton. This was rather shocking, as I expected to get one shot. So on the bright side, I didn't get one shot by the dragon. But on the other hand, the dragon's attack pattern and movement was completely f***ed. I don't think the dragon has ever done this before outside of when I beat the first release version. I also came to notice that the terrain of the island was completely f***ed as well, as it was hilly for some unexplainable reason. And once I had taken out all of the crystals, I was also presented with yet another horrendous fact, which was that the dragon would only perch long enough for me to get 3 hits in. So to summarize the situation, it was f***ed. But after spending a total of around 20 minutes on the dragon fight, it was finally done with. So far, this might be the absolute most annoying experience I've had in a vanilla dragon fight, but putting this scuffed little homicide aside, there was still the main task at hand to tend to, so I made my way through our gateway and immediately spotted an end city with a ship which was very epic. I then made my way up to the previously mentioned ship and laid my slimy and greedy hands upon our set of wings. However, I decided to not use them to glide down to the ground. The reason for this was that I'm not allowed to use enchantments in this world. This includes mending, so repairing an elytra would require me to hunt phantoms, which, as we saw in our last episode, are very much capable of clapping me rather properly, and even then, you can only repair it a certain number of times before it turns too expensive to repair, meaning that they can practically break permanently, just like my hopes and dreams. Therefore, I ideally wanted multiple sets of wings, but before I went off to find another end city, I made sure to kill all of the shulkers I could from a safe distance, which was 4, but none of those 4 shulkers dropped a shell, which made my life significantly less pleasant to live out. And in killing those shulkers, I had used up pretty much all of the arrows I had brought, as I only had 3 left, so I decided to simply take the massive and veiny L and move on to our next end city. Before long, we had successfully located our second end city, which also happened to have a ship, which was very epic. This time, I started off by killing the shulkers by the entrance, before heading to the ship to grab the wings, and this time, we were significantly more lucky, as both of them dropped their shells, meaning we had enough for a shulker box. I decided that 1 box was enough, as going up against shulkers in melee with half health and no regeneration seemed less than optimal, so I made my way up to the ship to grab the wings and made my way back to our gateway. I then jumped through the portal and made my journey back home to our island, bringing our adventure to a close. And that is about all that we have time for in this episode, so there we have it. I built a proper farm tower and beat the Ender Dragon. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you in the next one.